One must understand, while the optics of the entire dialogue was good, but at the end of the day, US President Joe Biden called President Xi Jinping a dictator. The world has had a sigh of relief when the power number one meets the power number two. And there is a conflict which is going on in Ukraine. There is a conflict which is going on in Gaza. The world cannot afford a third conflict where the two main powers actually go head on head. China can talk to US. India will deal with China on its own terms.
Joe Biden and Xi Jinping held a US China summit on November 15th. The venue was a sprawling mansion in California. The talks were 4 hours long, and the world media just cannot stop talking about it. Some are calling it the big truce, given the frost in US China relations in recent times. Others are calling it a strategic reset in times of global conflicts. But in reality, it is just a balancing act and a very delicate one at that. I have with me Shishir Gupta, Hindustan Times executive editor. Shishir, your sense of this balancing act that's played out in California over the last 3 days?
Namaskar. What has happened over there is right now is actually the world has had a sigh of relief when the power number one meets the power number two. And there is a conflict which is going on in Ukraine. There is a conflict which is going on in Gaza. The world cannot afford a third conflict where the two main powers actually go head on head. So in this way, it is actually the talks are actually a stabilizing factor for the world. But to say that whether there is a reset in relationship, that is sort of exaggerating the entire scenario. What has actually happened is that the two sides have decided that they will avoid any accidental collisions. They will avoid to further destabilize the world. They'll talk to each other with the military commanders talking to each other and reduce the chance for any accidental collision. One must understand, while the optics of the entire dialogue was good, but at the end of the day, US President Joe Biden called President Xi Jinping a dictator, which is actually a statement of fact. So to say that it is a reset of relationship, that is a wrong thing to say. Yes, the world is a much better place to live as far as any violence or any future war is concerned.
You talked about Biden calling Xi Jinping a dictator. He qualified that answer, but that must have not gone down with Mr. Xi Jinping and his supporters, isn't it?
You say he called a spade very clearly, and it definitely wouldn't have gone down very well with supporters of Xi Jinping, but that is a fact also, because the Communist Party of China, it's a single party which is ruling China. So I
Right.
don't see there was anything wrong in Biden sort of qualifying and calling President Xi Jinping a dictator.
Absolutely. Goes to show they were really free and frank talks, which is what a lot of the Western media would have us believe. In terms of agreements at the summit, apart from agreeing to resume military dialogue, the big takeaway seems to be that they would pick up each other's calls when the other would call, and that perhaps points to the levels to which the relationship had soured.
You see, it is very important for the theater commanders to talk to each other so that there is no any accidental firing or any accidental collision or anything that can happen in what is right now a very tense Indo-Pacific. So in that sense, it is a right thing to do. But what has actually happened is, if you read the statement that has come out from the White House, President Biden has actually come out very clearly on where US stands, what does it want from China, and under no circumstances, if you read the statement, there is any concession. There are only two things that come out of it, which is actually for the global good. One is narcotics, which is basically production of fentanyl and synthetic drugs, And mind you, where are the drugs coming from? 99% of methamphetamine uh, tablets, or what are called yaba tablets, come to India from Myanmar. And these are places like the Shan state in Myanmar, which is held by the Chinese sponsored militias. So it is important that the world actually takes action against the synthetic drugs. What is the other thing? The other thing is climate change. Now, the two sides have decided to actually join hands on climate change for a concrete action. Now, that obviously can have political overtones, because if the two sides gang up together to force a third side to take a particular climate change action, that could be a possibility. But what is important in this entire thing for the world to look at is the Taiwan election, which is coming up in January. Now, what is happening is that the current dispensation, the DPP, is actually logging horns with a united opposition, which is not so anti-China as the current DPP is. The election is January 2024. Now, if there is a change of regime over there, then it will help China. So rather than sort of conquer Taiwan, it actually can engineer change within Taiwan. So this is something that has to be watched out. Second thing that has to be watched out is how does it play out in the Indo-Pacific, where Biden has said very clearly that they are for freedom of navigation. Now, something that the China doesn't want. And
Right.
China goes into that extent where it sort of pushes and nudges people within the Indo-Pacific to toe its line. Now, that part has been now been settled in the sense that the Southeast Asian countries would now be breathing a sigh of relief, as if the two giants have now actually decided to engage each other. But that they have sort of decided to shake hands, I don't think so that is the case.
Okay, so you're basically saying India has nothing to worry as so far as there is no structural shift in US China relations.
Uh, that's a good question. Now, the point in this is that India normally does not comment ball by ball. Now, India rather sort of see it play it out. Now, people who are sort of anti-India, or the Western media, would sort of say, listen, Xi Jinping has talked to the Australian Prime Minister. Xi Jinping has also talked to the Japanese Prime Minister. So the Quad actually has gone weak, which is not the case. India is very clear that it decides its relationship with China on its own terms. There is strategic autonomy as far as all these issues go. So India is just waiting and watching and seeing what happens over there. And as far as the two sides talking, good. They should talk to each other because they both are nuclear powered, and with China making sort of hundreds of intermediate ballistic missile weapons. So it is good for the two sides to talk.
One of the key things, and I'm going to end with that, one of the key things that Biden said was that we want to focus on resuming military to military ties. Explain to us the importance, because that has happened. This meeting, which took place after almost 1 year. Between these two leaders, they've agreed to resume military to military ties. Why is that important given the status of global conflicts today? Would you sort of explain that to our viewers?
You see, what is happening right now is that China is trying to expand beyond the first chain of islands, which would in the south South China Sea. Now, when I'm saying first chain of islands, if you look at the map, it will show you Indonesia, Philippines, Busan Channel, all the way up to Japan. Now, that is what is happening. China is trying to expand onto that. And for that, it is using its submarines. For that, it is using its ships. For that, it is sort of, continuously transgressing, identification zones as far as Taiwan goes. One must also understand that America has a full-fledged facility at Guam, in Philippines, in Japan. So the whole thing is how to avoid an accident between the two sides and the two nuclear powered rivals. And with the American Navy totally dominant in the Indo-Pacific, the Chinese Navy trying to expand its footprints all the way into Indo-Pacific, there is a definite cause of concern where the two sides just might sort of clash into each other or have friction. So it is important for instance, the The Indo-Pacific commander of the U.S. Navy to talk to the Chinese commander, which would be the sort of the northern theater commander or the eastern theater commander, to talk to each other. At least have a hotline as to tell which side is on what position, so that there is no the any accident can be avoided in future, a military accident which can flare up, and there is a very serious possibility of a flare up over there. That is why it is important. As far as India is concerned, India also has military ties used with China, but the point is that the Indian relationship, the Indian border continues to remain where it is. And you must understand, the two are not actually intersecting each other. So China can talk to US. India will deal with China on its own terms. One must remember that it has been 1 year since China had an ambassador in India. So that is a separate thing. But the two sides to talk to each other, that is Indo-US, China-US, it's a very welcome development.
Okay, welcome development there. Definitely, the military to military talks very very important in an era where global conflicts are fairing up at the drop of a hat or at the flying of a balloon, so to speak, which actually started the whole face-off between China and the US in the first place. But thank you, Shishir, for sharing those details with us. Thank you, viewers, for watching this broadcast. Keep watching Hindustan Times Point Blank.